Hi folks, Chris Voss here from the chrisvossshow.com, the chrisvossshow.com. Here we're coming here with another podcast and a wonderful guest. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, hit that bell notification button so you get all notifications of the show. You can support the show at patreon.com/Chris Voss and get giveaways in our private groups, so be sure to get in on that. Thanks to AT&T for sharing the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus with us. You can see the reviews on the Chris Voss Show. And of course, look forward to the Note 8. You can get the Apple iPhone if you really want to, the Apple 8 and Apple, Apple X. Buy Android. Seriously, you'll like yourself much better in the long run. So I'm joined today by a wonderful gal named Jewel Ward, and Jewel Ward is a consultant, SEO, and digital stewardship expert in the theory and practice of information and data systems. She includes digital preservation and digital curation in her experience, and she has 20 years plus of combined experience with data and networked informations in business, research, and academia. Welcome to the show, Jewel.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today.
I just said the word informations. Since you're good at academia, you're probably going, what the hell is this man talking about?
No, it's not that at all. I think, in fact, as someone said, the older you get and the more you learn, the less you realize you know. And I think informations is a perfectly valid
informations that go through the inner tubes of the interweb, the giant tubes above our heads in the sky that pass me talking to you right now.
That's it.
So I went to public school. I mean, that's just a given. I think we all.
I did too. I went to a state school. Oh my God, for university.
I didn't go to college. No surprise. Everybody at home watching right now is going, "Yeah, we've read his BS." Yeah, it's clear he didn't go to college. So you bring a lot of experience to the show. We want to talk about entrepreneurism on the show and what it takes. I allege to do like startups and the glory, the ugly part of how the sausage is made of becoming an entrepreneur. Let's talk about that and some of your thoughts on it.
Right. I think this topic came up because so often when you're going through your Instagram feed, sometimes, or if you're on Instagram and you see these images of the fancy houses and the cars and, you know, the sharp suits and this is entrepreneurship. And I think that it misses the mark. Because I think ultimately what we're trying to do is create a product or a service that we're passionate about, that we can convince people to buy so we can make a living doing this. You know, it's our dream when you're trying to kind of get it out there to sell to everyone else. And yes, of course, we do want to make a living, but I think that if you're doing it for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reason. You have to do it for another purpose. Definitely
the passion. And I forgot to ask you for links to your website and stuff like that people can look at while we're having this chat.
Oh, sure. My website is www.impactzone.co, not .com, but .co. So impactzone.co. And then my Instagram is impactzoneco, and then the same for Twitter. And you can also find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook.
Cool. And I think I met you in Chris Brogan's secret group. I think was that where I met you? Cool. Yeah, he's got a great group there. He's just a great guy, Chris Brogan. Awesome author and just a wonderful person. So let's talk about that some more. I of course had experience bringing my startups from ground zero, and what we talked about across email, the top ramen days. So what you've been seeing, or what I guess you're referring to is you know, everyone sees the end product after what I call the sausage is made. Everyone sees the glory days of where you've been in business for 5 to 10 years, you're driving the Mercedes Benz, BMWs, whatever, and you're really successful, and people go, I want to be that guy.
They don't see the slog. They don't see the long hours. They don't see the giving up time. And by the way, if you hear a rat-a-tat-tat on the roof, that is those are acorns falling on the roof because it is October. So please, no one panic over some of the recent tragedies. There's nothing going on here. I didn't laugh when I said
acorns bombing your house.
I got acorns bombing my house.
That's probably a good thing. As long as it's not the SWAT team trying to get it.
What happens when you work from home is that you have to find the best room. So Right. So I wanted to talk a lot about, what really goes into it, because I've had people say to me, oh, I really hate my job in this corporation I'm working at. I'm really tired of working in the cube. I'm tired of working in the call centers. I'd like to have my own business. And, they ask me questions about what to do. And, I've been at this about 2.5 to 3 years now with this particular business. And then before that, I had done side work off and on for 10 or 15 years before that. And so I thought that I would discuss some of the things like learning. Should I just jump right in and talk about?
Jump right in. Let's.
Right. I think that some of the things that you have to learn is you have to understand that you're going to make a lot of sacrifices. And really the first 2 to 3 years, you're not going to see a lot of return on it. There really is, like, you can pretty much plan on paying yourself $1 a month. And this whole, especially with the tech companies, there's this very romantic image of, Hewitt and Packard starting their company in their parents' garage. And then, Facebook with Zuckerberg saying, starting in a house and all that, finally getting funding and starting out of a dorm room and all that, where there's a reason for this. And that's because your income does tend to be really up and down, at first. And so you have to be able to live in a place that you can be assured of having rent, electricity, and food. And that is why parents, when people start up businesses, they move in with their company. And I think that if, you have a year's savings, then you need to make sure that you've got 2 years savings if you're bootstrapping, because it's always everything takes longer than you think it's going to take.
That is a really important point. Everything is going to take longer than whatever you plan for. Mm-hmm. And if you're lucky, sometimes you get lucky, but it's really rare. But sometimes you get lucky and hit gold. But even then, it's like you say, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. And you're right. People do miss out on that thing. I have a nephew right now who's 17. He's an ambitious little guy, very competitive. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him about college, and I'm not sure what he set in, so he's not cemented to this, I'm sure. But he's like, Chris, I want to be like you. And I'm like, okay. He goes, yeah, I want to do YouTube videos and be an internet rock star or whatever. And I'm like, assuming I'm a rock star, but he thinks I am. And I'm like, Jeffrey, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And he tried to help set him up with, I guess the school project was to build his own YouTube. Mm-hmm. So he contacted me and said, hey, can you help me build a YouTube, Uncle? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll help you. But you have to do all the work. I'll tell you what to do. I'll guide you. I'll show you. I'll walk you through it. But you've got to do the work so that you learn it. And at that point, he's like, oh, man. He's a teenager. I give it to him. He's going to be fine. But he doesn't want to do the work part.
No. I mean, I think that one of the things I used to wonder about before I did this, like especially a lot of the founders of companies, they always understand the value of $1. They watch their pennies, they are prepared to work hard. And the ones that survive, I mean, they learn, and you've got to have like a good sense of humor. I mean, like, I love Richard Branson, for example. He's one of those guys that I just think is hilarious I'm sure he's hard driving and very particular and very precise, but also seems to try to make it fun. Patrick Bet-David is, someone else that I think is fun to see what he's done with especially, his story. But, right. I mean, you have to be prepared to put in a lot of long hours, and it is hard to understand sometimes what you have to do. You walk into it and you have expertise in a certain area. And this is the other thing I wanted to talk about, is that, you have to suddenly become an accountant, a salesperson, a marketing person. You've got to understand how to run all the software. You have to then, write the documentation. You've got to write the copy. If you're able, you write you build the website. Maybe you'll get that right or wrong, depending on how much experience you have. Then you've got to put your processes together. And then in the midst of all that, you have to actually still get the work done and do your best to make the clients happy. And so, along the lines of what you were talking about with your nephew with all the work, he sees the image of you sitting on the YouTube videos. You've got lots of followers. There are things that come from that. You get some sponsorships, or, the tools and free toys you get to give away. And, oh, that's really cool. But what he doesn't understand is you have to spend 20 hours editing videos and coming up with concepts. in order and doing a lot of free work to get to that point where, people are paying attention to you and listening. And
the first 2 years I was doing videos early on my own blog, and then eventually on YouTube. But I was doing video blog posts because I knew they were the future. I was a little ahead of my time because back then video wasn't transposing well. But so I was doing posts back then, and I remember the first 2 years. I think it was like the first year and a half. Like literally, no one was listening to me. Like no one. Like and after like a year, I think I was making it for like 3 people. And then all of a sudden, people saw that there was a library of content there, and the numbers started going up. And people really have to see that. I see that with a lot of failure with my clients that think you can just go on social media for 2 or 3 months and rock it. You really have to put in the years and time to build your assets and your online content. And if people go to your YouTube and they only see there's 5 videos there, they're not going to subscribe to you. Even I don't. If I go see someone's YouTube, I get invited to it. There's just 5 videos there. I'm not going to subscribe to it because that person isn't working it. They're not building any great content. And so you need to do that.
And I think that leads into one of my other thoughts about when you're building a company is you have to let go of your snobbery. And especially if you have worked in the corporate world, or in my case where I used to work at like MCI, and then went into data communications and then into academia, where there's this rigid hierarchy. And you have to understand that regardless of your experience, you're going to have to go out there and court your audience in a way that you didn't have to before.
Yeah.
And you have to also, for example, I remember a lawyer saying to me when we were talking about her SEO, and she had 35 years of experience and she's a leader in her field, and she's reduced in her mind to having to, try to get 5 reviews on Google like a food truck, as she put it. Now, she's not putting down food trucks, but, she loves, we all love food trucks.
We all love taco trucks too.
But, when, lawyers are not accustomed to thinking themselves as getting, 3 and 5 star reviews, so to speak. And so I think that sometimes with clients, I've had to counsel them in terms of, as they're trying to build their business, that yes, you have all this expertise, but you are going to have to go out there and let go of your ego and let go of your snobbery, as I put it, and you're going to have to compete, because if you don't, your competitor will.
Yeah, being an entrepreneur is an experience unlike anything anyone I think can do in life, probably next to giving birth. That might be harder. It doesn't sound fun, so there's that. But it's an experience that will force you to self-actualize like nothing else. And I think if you don't self-actualize, you'll probably go down in flames. And I remember when we started, there was a number of small businesses I started before I started the one that really went pop for us. And my partner in 1993, I think it was. When we started our first business, I quit my little corporate job I had. I think I was making like $2,500 a month in '93, quit my job to go start our first courier business called Silver Streak Express, and went from that to, fortunately, my employer, who's a very wonderful people, they gave me a 2-month severance to ride this out. And the CEO had said to me, he goes, look, unless you go do this business or do any business, because you're just an entrepreneur. They used to call me the entrepreneur at my company. You're just not going to be happy. So I'm going to give you 2 months pay to go do this stupid thing, get out of your system. When your business fails, just come back to work here. We'll call it, Then, but if you come back, when you come back, he says, you got to stay here. There's no more of this crap with you wanting to always do your own thing. You work for me, blah, blah, blah. So out of the kindness of his heart, he gave me 2 months of income. So for the first 2 months of starting our company, we didn't have any money, and I lived on my money. My partner was still keeping his day job. So I was launching the business. And then when the 3rd month came, we'd accumulated like $900 I think we have more than that. We had to start paying for phone bills, and back then we had the big brick phone, which was expensive as hell to take calls on. So yeah, I went from basically $2,500 to earning nothing for 2 months, and then $900 a month, and I think it was $900 a month for like the first 6 months. So it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough living on $900 a month. We were working 18 hours a day. We would do these blood test deliveries and urine samples with the blood testing facilities and stuff, and medication. A patient needs to figure out what's going on with their body, and so we would get calls all times of night, and we were just driving cars 18 hours a day, and we were eating top ramen. I think I was living at top ramen, living at the dollar menu at the fast food places, which is where I put on all my weight in 6 months, and sitting in a car. But yeah, you sacrifice a lot to start your own business.
And along the lines of it only showing the success, you read these stories about the early days of Apple where Steve Jobs had to actually go out and convince people to give him these machines on credit, and then sold it to the customers, and then took that money and paid those people back. And it all sounds funny because you look at it and go, well, of course they were going to be a success, but they didn't know that at the time. It's only retrospectively.
Yeah, you're just living in a world where you're just like, I'm building it, and I hope when it's done they'll come. If not, we just wasted a lot of money and time.
Right, and there are plenty of people who, the line. It's a cliche, but the line between success and failure can actually be a very, very, very thin one. One thing had gone wrong with that, they would have all been out. All that money for that machinery had to owe those people, and had no customers or clients. And it was and so it sounds fun, but in what I'm getting at is it's not for the faint of heart.
So.
It is, you have got to have. I'm a lady, so I say it, you've got to have hearts of steel, regardless of your gender, and
steel.
And you've got to be able to just stick it out. It's because what you see when you see these things of these successes is you're seeing the minority that made it to the top. And it's not to say that you won't make it that far, but the likelihood is that you will get your company up to a certain point, and then you may decide you don't want to grow it any further, or you're happy with what's there. Some people do that. But anyway, so what I just wanted to sort of make the point of that there's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants, and you've really got to have nerves of steel to just, trust and have faith and jump off that cliff. And
yeah, and in fact, it's worth noting 99% of businesses fail in the first 2 years. Mm-hmm. And you've got to realize those odds when you're going in, and you will work harder than you've ever worked. I had to sacrifice dating for a couple of years. We were working 18-hour days. I was working so hard in my office after we started our second company after a year and a half, a mortgage company. I was working so hard to get these two businesses going. The courier business had gone fairly well, and it was employing me and my partner. And then we started this mortgage business because I wanted to be in the white collar area as opposed to blue collar. And I was living out of my office to a point that I said to my partner, we just need to see about maybe building me a shower here. And we were taking over bigger offices as we grew. And I'm just like, the only reason I go home is to shower. And literally my employees would sometimes come in the morning, and there I would be on the front couch, and they'd be waking me up, and I'd be sleeping on the front couch. And literally I was only going home for about 6 months just to shower, wave at the house, and then come back to the office. So it's a very unglamorous business. You have to be everything pretty much in your company. You have to be the salesperson. You have to be, like you said, the accountant, all this sort of stuff. Now you can vet some of this stuff out where you can hire accountants, attorneys, and sometimes you can hire salespeople if you have the money. But the problem is you still have to know it and manage it better than they do. You have to know what's going on, because if you don't, it's going to get screwed up. And that's what you find when you're, You know, I used to say to people, they used to say, "Oh, you're the CEO of your company." I'm like, "No, I'm the CEO and the janitor. I do everything that there could possibly be done, including picking up the trash employees leave around the office."
I think the best example I can give of that is if you think to food service. I think almost everyone has a teenager to college, if you know, or early 20s have done some kind of food service. With a lot of these chains, these managers actually started out on the floor, you know, and work their way up. And when it gets busy, you will see them. If they're swamped, those managers are in there at all the different food stations, and they are helping make sure the food gets, you know, the food gets cooked, that it gets taken out. And they're not just standing there giving directions. They actually are up to their elbows in pizza dough or you know, whatever it is they're doing. And that is actually entrepreneurship right there. You know,
yeah.
So that the manager of a restaurant will actually know how every piece of it works. And his job is to jump in there and facilitate it going forward, you know, to provide the best service and product that they can.
And you have to learn to be smarter than your employees. You may not end up being smarter than them, but you have to be smarter than them because you're constantly having to innovate. With all of our businesses, there were always a moment where we would there'd be some bleeding out part of the corporation on the balance sheet where it's like the telemarketing unit is losing money and we've got to fix it. And if we don't fix it, it's going to bleed out and tank the ship. So you'd have to address these different issues. And of course, a lot of things change. Sometimes your model doesn't work. Your initial entrepreneur model doesn't work. You've got to change that. When we launched our mortgage company and our career company, I believe within the first month, I saw indicators of going a different route than the original model we'd given. And we changed the model. In one case, we changed the name that the Society of Utah didn't like. It was called Ace Mortgage, and people didn't like the connotation of gambling, I guess. Didn't help that we put an Ace card as our logo.
Oh, there's that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of backfired. But within 30 days, we flipped it. Once we saw that the consumers didn't like our name. So we flipped it to Park Place Mortgage, and away we went. And so it's really important. That's one of the biggest failures that I see a lot of entrepreneurs make. They have a model in their head when they start the business, and they ride that frickin' model out till the very end. And it's tough sometimes. The third company we started that was a major company, well, we started a few different small companies before that. But I think all told, we started about 26 different corporations, or I'm on 26 different corporations. The third company we started, we got literally the first year we got no income from it, and we buried 50 grand in it. Now it was 50 grand borrowed from other companies, and we had income from there, so we were able to ride that out. But literally having no income for that business and losing 50 grand, I mean, at the end of the year, we had to look at each other and go, this thing ate 50 grand and didn't bring in any money. I mean, it brought in money, but it didn't pay us back. It was still bleeding out. And we had to look at each other and go, do we want to keep shoveling more money into this 50 grand, or do we want to write off 50 grand and close this thing down and stop the bleeding? Fortunately, we stuck with it, and it turned a profit the next year, and bada bing, bada boom. But that's the pain. There's a whole lot of pain that goes into a business. So I think what you're saying is when you see those pretty pictures and the end results of the 24 hours of living. The other thing about being an entrepreneur too, that used to really get to me, it doesn't get to me too much anymore, but it used to really bug me. All I would sleep is business. Like, God, that's all you do. Like 24/7, you think about your company. Yeah, it's very different. When I moved to Vegas, I had investors in a mortgage company, and it was so nice at 5 o'clock to go home and not have to sweat the money, because it was their money. And I sweated the money a little bit because I have to take care of my investors. But it was nice to sometimes go home at 5 and go, I'm not sweating it as much because it's not my money. There's a real big difference. And when you own your own company, it's 24/7. There's no, at 5 o'clock, you don't check out and go, I'm going to go home and not think about this stuff until 8 o'clock tomorrow. No, that's not the way it works. We didn't take vacations the first few years. Sometimes we do little travel escapes on the weekend, but we didn't.
Right.
There was no vacations. There was no fun. We were all driving our beat up old cars because we were like 22, I think, at the time. Yeah, we weren't getting rich anytime soon. I don't think we really started doing well until about 1996, 97. I think that's when things started kicking in. So it took us a good 3 to 4 years to really start living a cool lifestyle. It took a lot of work, and it took us a lot of luck, and it took a lot of pain, and yeah, I mean, just be prepared 24/7, the stress of your life. All you'll dream is business. I used to love it when I dreamed about a girl every now and then. I'm like, wow, I would actually dream about my business meetings the next morning. It was like my brain was like trying to prepare and preview me for them. So I dream at night about the interactions that I have at my business meetings the next morning, and it would just drive me insane.
Right. I liked your point about having to know, trying to figure out when to continue delivering the product or service that you have, and then and sticking out with it and trying to make that change. You know, I do offer digital stewardship, but one of the things I had envisioned a kind of laptop lifestyle for my company. And one of the things that I realized with the digital stewardship is I would have to actually be on site more often.
Yeah.
That's work because it's digital archives, it's digital curation. It tends to actually be the kind of consulting work where you need to actually go to them physically and be on site. And I realized for a variety of reasons that really wasn't actually going to work out. Now, I do still offer it, and if people want it, I can do it here and there. But I think to be a regular consultant flying to different places, that was not quite the lifestyle that I had in mind. And so one of the ways that you have to do is then start thinking about what are the related kinds of, how do I say this? What is it that you're actually doing? What is the core of your company? And this goes back to what you're talking about the self-actualization and really having to understand yourself and your strengths and your weaknesses, and then how that can manifest itself in the company. You know, because I would not have thought of myself as search engine optimization, you know, as a marketing person. But when I looked at, you know, the work that was coming in and the questions that people, how do I say this? I actually got into search engine optimization because I was in different groups on different forums, and I was answering questions that a lot of entrepreneurs were asking. I mean, you had people starting up their businesses and they had questions. So then what I did was I actually asked them, you know, what are you doing? You know, I would answer them is what I'm saying. And I think my tongue is tripping over my thoughts right now. And so then people started coming to me and asking me if I would do this work for them. And so it's information systems, it's information retrieval. It's similar to digital stewardship, you know, and so sometimes you have to be open to the idea that your company is going to go in a slightly different direction in terms of the products and services. And, and you have to be okay with that and sort of put the checks in along the way, because you don't want to end up doing something you don't want to do. But it is about being open to finding out what your customers and the people out there who want to buy from you, what they want.
Totally. It's a lot of work. And you know, we live in a society now where people always just see the end thing. They're like, oh, look, it's the old couple holding hands. I want a relationship like that. Well, guess what? It's a lot of freaking work. And those guys put a lot of work into it. And then when the work comes up, no one wants to do the work. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. I think I might die early because of the weight that I put on. Of course, I hold some responsibility that I haven't taken care of myself over the years. But a lot of times it's hard when you're just so into your business and living your business. The other thing is weekends, that whole thing of clocking out on Friday and going, I don't have to think about you till Monday. That's gone too. You're going to work weekends. You're going to work into the middle of the night. I remember at the peak of our business when we were doing really well, I remember some of my processors, I think they either quit or we got so much business I had to step in. And I was literally coming home at night, and my girlfriend, of course, she's like, you gotta go to bed with me. We gotta sleep together. I can't sleep if you're not in the bed, blah, blah, blah. And so I crawl into bed with her. And fortunately, she would go to sleep in like 5 minutes. She was great. So she would go to sleep every night, and I'd have to sneak out of bed and go spend 2 hours processing our files and doing all the work for my company, sometimes 2 to 3 hours till about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. and then I'd go back into work and do it all again. And that was pretty much almost a daily pattern. And even then we were doing very well money-wise, but I was working my butt off because you've got this, you're constantly hiring employees and influx of employees and trying to balance them and finding good ones. It just never ends. I mean, even when we got up to almost 100 employees that we had with our companies, it never ended with the hard work. In fact, I always thought that the bigger we got, the more money we'd make and the easier it would get. No, no, it got hard. It got harder and harder and harder. And then you start living on this high wire where you realize that, these almost 100 employees depend on you to constantly get their bills paid. When you get that half-inch stack of checks you have to sign every 2 weeks, you realize that, holy crap, my job is to take care of them too. Wow.
I've not been in your position to have like all these employees under me, but I will say that the self-care issue, I think, is one that has to be addressed. And I think that if I were to give advice to anyone starting up, it would be sit down and come up with your entrepreneur's menu of quick, cheap, and healthy things that you can do. And somewhere in your day, find 10 minutes to walk in the morning and 10 minutes to walk at night. If nothing else, to just get some sunshine and sunlight in your eyes, to get outside a little bit and breathe a little bit of fresh air so you're not sitting in front of the laptop all day long, because I mean, that is something that I was doing for a while, where you literally just, I've learned that crockpot bean soup is my friend, and, smoothies are my friends, and stuff, and try, when you do get to go to the grocery store or you're going down the street, to something to make at least the best, healthiest choice. So I will tell people who are watching this, it is hard to get exercise in and eat healthy, but you can do something besides exist on coffee and fast food.
Yeah.
It's that you can do it, and I'm making myself do it now, because if I have to go to McDonald's, I get that, again, I've had to get over my snobbery and eat at the places I can afford. And, as you're building up. And so it's like, get the salad and with the chicken or something instead of the quarter pounder and fries,
Yeah, you're constantly sitting at your desk. You're working over accountant numbers, taxes sometimes, with all the forms you have to fill out as a business. You literally have to do everything, especially if you're using sweat equity to build your businesses. The first company that not the first company I started, but the first company I started with my partner that started our chain of good companies, we started with $2,000 that we had between us. And then I think I had 1,000, he had 1,000, then I had 2 months of free pay from my employer. We started that with $2,000, and yeah, we went through that 2,000 really quick. We were one of the first courier companies in Utah to start using the brick phones, the cellular phones, if you will, so that our clients could actually call us on the road. We didn't even have the money to buy a big expensive, those intercom systems, CB systems, or whatever people were using back then. But and a lot of times there wasn't a way to communicate with the drivers back then. I mean, cellular service had just come out, and I remember our bill for that phone was like $800 a month. And we tried not to use it except for emergencies and for client calls. But man, $800 a month for that cell phone. It was the big giant brick one, just crazy. And so that thing was eating up all of our money right from the get-go. But being an entrepreneur is one of the hardest things you can ever do, and it will shape you as a person, or reshape you as a person, and beat you into, it's almost like basic training. It will beat you into a pulp, and you'll have to survive it, come up with ways to self-actualize to survive it.
Right. And like what you were talking about with the phone is, you learn to be frugal, and you learn to spend what to spend your money on. And I would say that one of the mistakes I made up early on is I had worked at funded startups before. So I thought I knew what it meant to work at a startup, so I can start up my own. And it's completely different when it's your own money, because this was my savings I was spending. And I look now back at some of the things I spent money on in the early days, and I was acting like I was at a corporation that had VC funding, and I didn't. so I burned through cash those first few months, and now I regret that. And so what I would say is that from the first days, I wouldn't say adopt a poverty mentality, and I wouldn't say to be cheap, but I would say to be frugal and to be smart about what you do and where you spend your money. And again, like a lot of things, give up some of that snobbery. Instead of eating at Chipotle, you go to McDonald's. Instead of getting Pete's or Starbucks, you just make Maxwell House drip coffee. And it's okay. It won't be like this forever. And those are not terrible things to have to eat. Some things are healthier than others at McDonald's, but it's when you're like, I'm a coffee snob. And so it was hard to go down to the less expensive coffee, but there are bigger problems in this world, right? So that's where I'm probably talking about myself when I was saying I had to give up a lot of the snobbery things, but it's I thought that, in terms of watching
most people do.
Yeah, and I thought watching costs meant you didn't get to have popcorn and a Coke at the movie. I didn't understand that it meant you don't get to go to a movie, or that Netflix streaming is the big treat that you pay for when you're really watching your costs, and you do. But I think in the end it will change every view you have of money, because I completely look at value now. Price of source is always a factor, but I'm not always as caught up in like the shiny toys. And some of that may be because I now understand the marketing that's going on behind that and the psychological nudges that go with it.
Plus, being an entrepreneur, what you start to learn, or hopefully most people learn, this is what I learned, is the power of a dollar. So we started our first company with like $2,000, our second big company with $4,000, both turned them into multi-million-dollar companies that would still be here today if I hadn't moved out of state and decided to leave them behind. The mortgage company was wiped out by the mortgage crisis, where most of the mortgage business was wiped out, but it lasted almost 20 years. And what you find is that I got lost in my segue there, so I lost my point. I guess it's still in the morning, or I need another coffee. But no, what you find is that you invest. If you invest money and you take $1, you should be able to turn it into like $4 by putting it into your business. I've had people say to me, Chris, you live in Vegas, why don't you gamble? I'm like, because I've learned that giving a casino $1,000 means they get the $1,000. If I put $1,000 in my business, I might make $4,000 back from it, or whatever the component is of X equals Y. But you start to learn that, and so you start taking a look at your expenditures and going, do I want a $1,000 new laptop, or do I want to put this money in my business and hope I get it back?
Right. And I'm not sure who was the first to say this, but I know that Steve Harvey talked about it, and I thought it's a practical advice of what you have to do to build upward. And it's like you start with $1 and you make it $10. And this is where being an entrepreneur changes your mindset. Because I think initially I would just think, okay, I have to have $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000 without really a path towards that. And what he says, and I agree with him, is you take $1 and you figure out how to make that $10. Mm-hmm. And then, you save part of that, but then you figure out how to make that $100. And then you save part of that and you invest the other in something that's going to get you forward, and you make it 1,000 and then 10,000 and so on. And so that's how you have to think in terms of where, when you know the value of $1, you're thinking, where can I invest it? How can this give me an output that is going to bring me a profit and make my life better, simpler, easier, provide a better service?
Yeah, totally. It's you really look at that. And I remember we were looking at buying, I think, a $2,000 copier. We had to buy one of those first copiers, because I came in the business of brick and mortar, where when you started a business, you had to get an office, you had to get a phone bank line, you had to hire a secretary to work the front desk, and you had to furnish that office. And that was how you did businesses back then, which was very expensive. Even buying phone lines and stuff was just crazy back then.
And phones.
When you look back on it now, I remember one month we had a $45,000 phone bill. And I look back on it now, and a lot of those long distance calls you can now make for free, or, well, they're not really free, but you know what I mean. But I remember we had to strong arm companies to give us the lowest long distance rates, and we were constantly negotiating given our consumption rate. But yeah, we were looking at this copier, and I'll never forget, we just hem and hawed, and we were trying to make the right decision about this copier because it was $2,000 that meant that it was $2,000 that we didn't get to have that went to the company. And I remember this very early on, but we made the decision that this would help take us to the next level, which it did. We were buying a $4,000 company, I think, within a few months after that. Mm-hmm. Trying to make the decision of, do I not eat ramen this week and buy a copier for the and for the next year I'll be living on ramen, or do I buy the copier, invest in the business so that 6 months from now I'll be buying a $4,000 copier and we'll have a lot more money. So it's hard. You make a lot of sacrifices to your life, your family life. I'm probably still single all my life because of how many years I've just been doing my own businesses and been knee deep in them. Yeah, it's taken away from my personal life. It's put a lot of weight on me, put a lot of stress on me when it comes to the brain. If I seem broken and half retarded these days, you can blame all the company business I did and things I created.
Well, I think that your points are well taken, because you have to have a very understanding set of family and friends who, you know, when you are sort of, they may not hear from you for months, and then suddenly you've got a break and you're sort of calling them up, and it seems a little bit all or nothing. But they have to be a little bit understanding that you're doing what you can. You know, you're not forgetting about them. You're just not there. I mean, for reasons that are complex, but I mean, I couldn't go to my niece's wedding this summer, and I knew about it 6 months in advance, but it's just the things that occurred at the time. I couldn't go. And, you know, it's terribly upsetting when those things happen. But, you know, so when people talk about the sacrifices, it's not an abstract thing. And that health issues, and, you know, when you're talking about the stress and strain on the brain, I think that one of the things I've seen with a lot of entrepreneurs is a lot of the anxiety, and it doesn't get talked about. I think now mental health issues are more acceptable to discuss publicly. But yes, I mean, I've had plenty of anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and you're not sleeping because you're trying to figure out how you're going to make those ends meet those first few years. You know, I think next year I'm coming out of a period of instability, and I think I'm heading into a period of instability as I head into the third year. But it's not to say that I haven't just had, you know, meltdowns here and there. And perhaps I should not be admitting this to a whole bunch of people, but I think that it has to be said that when you do this, I mean, it's part and parcel of it. You wouldn't be a human being if you weren't worried about it, and you can try to
and being honest about it. Yeah. I mean, you have up and downs. It's not like you create this balance sheet that constantly goes up and you're just like, oh, okay, so I get through the hard time and then everything's just great. No, it's constant. I mean, there were times as we built our companies that there would be some section that would start bleeding out financially, and whatever model we had was not working on that model anymore, and we had to come up with a new model, or else it was going to bankrupt and sink the ship. Mm-hmm. And you're constantly running around your business. I liken it to the little Dutch boy who's running around putting his fingers in the dam, trying to keep the dam from flooding. And that's literally what you're doing most times. You're just running from leak to leak, trying to keep this giant dam from killing you. And sometimes you got more leaks than you got fingers to plug them. And so it's a constant challenge of spinning plates and plugging holes and trying to make a profit. I remember that some of the toughest times are when you have a model that's working, it's very profitable, it's going fine, and then the market changes on you. And it's like, no, you got to do things differently. And you don't recognize it because you're like, you know, this one's working. And then all of a sudden that one stops working and you're like, holy crap, now we're really gonna have to brace this other model that seems to be working. And then you got to hope it works. But yeah, there's you can be in business for years and sometimes have bad months or bad times where you're just like, I'm not sure if what I'm eating tomorrow and where the paycheck's coming tomorrow, but I better go find it. And it's never a guarantee. It's every new paycheck, every new client, it's a new bit of work that you got to chase and do. and it's never over. And the bigger it gets, the harder it gets. Like I've had people say, when you get rich, it's easy. No, when you get rich, it's harder. It gets way harder, and it keeps getting harder the bigger you go.
And I think that your point, the other aspect to your point about you're following a particular model and suddenly things shift, is that the other thing is that you have this whole other issue of not just your products and services, or within your field of products and services, what is or isn't working. You've got that whole greater economy out there where, as you were talking about with your mortgage business, you spent however many years building that, and then something happens that was not in your, just not in your control. And you've just learned that you've got to have money in the bank and something to fall back on, because you have to just accept as part of it that you're going to hit recession periods, and there are going to be slowdowns in the overall economy. So it's not just ups and downs and slowdowns in the business. It's also, you've got that bigger wave of the economy where there's going to be ups and downs within the economy, where people may want your products and services, but it's just they're having to spend it on basic services and they can't quite afford you just yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure our courier business would have, I think our courier business would have survived, but I know that back in the day, we used to do a lot of mortgage package deliveries, a lot of paperwork, stuff for lawyers, things of that nature. And a lot of that's really been replaced. We were starting to see the faxing replacing some of our work, but now everything's pretty much electronic. And so I think that would have affected it. The mortgage business, after being in it for almost 20 years, I had no idea that it could be wiped off the face of the earth. And that's what the mortgage recession, Great Depression almost, it would have been a Great Depression if we hadn't been able to bail everything out. But it was very close to a Great Depression, and it wiped out the mortgage business. And I never thought that something I built for 20 years could be wiped out. In fact, most every business I've ever built, I always felt was going to be a crown jewel in an empire, and it was going to live forever. And a lot of times it didn't. Sometimes it was partners that screwed things up. Sometimes we didn't own the company. We bought in like a franchise part of something, and then suddenly they went bankrupt, and the owner embezzled money. And so the FCC was shutting down parts of everyone who'd worked with them. There was a million ways to kill a business, and we always seemed to found them. And we found a lot of businesses. We were trying a lot of things, so that was part of it as well. But yeah, it will take your heart, your soul, your body. You sacrifice everything to start your business and run your business. And even when it's the most successful, when you see those guys that are driving around Mercedes Benzes, and you see all the finished product of years and blood, sweat, and tears, hard work, those guys are still sweating hard. They have managing at the level that you have to manage when you live at that type of lifestyle is maddening and hard, especially if you're not used to it. I remember when we first went through it, where we became successful, we started getting nice houses, nice cars, nice stuff. The stuff you own ends up owning you. And you realize that you're at a level where you can't quit your job anymore and go to work for somebody, because you're not in the Fortune 500 world where you can say, well, I'm a $500,000 a year vice president at IBM, so I'll just go over to Apple and they'll give me $500,000 a year to work over there. No, not when you're an entrepreneur. You can't quit your job. You can't, like for a long time, I wanted to move out of Utah. And I lived trapped in what I used to call the gilded cage. I lived in a place I didn't want to live in anymore in Utah. And I wanted to move to Vegas or California, but I couldn't because my business was largely in Utah. And I hated it. And so it was like living in a gilded cage prison where you can't get out. You can't quit your day job. You can't just go, hey, I'm just going to quit my job and go someplace, because no one gives a crap when you're an entrepreneur what you did before about hiring you and paying you the extraordinary salary that you've built for yourself. And so you realize you're on this high wire, and it's a long way down. It's a long way down. And I think one of my partners quit his day job, and he thought that he could just go someplace else and say, oh, I was the vice president at this place, and they're going to pay me, $40,000 a month. Didn't happen. And so you live on that high wire where more and more you realize that the fall is bigger and bigger, and you have to make sure that you don't fall, because if you do, you're going to lose a whole lot more than it used to be when you were eating top ramen. So
right. And I was going to say that one of the funniest stories I've had an entrepreneur tell me was when he was saying how when he hit it big and he became a millionaire and he built this 35,000 square foot house, with the pool and all this stuff for all the parties and everything. Well, within a few years of that, he actually met the woman that he's now married to, and they started a family. And so they soon discovered that the problem with a 35,000 square foot house is that, yes, they had nannies, but the children would be crying somewhere in the house and they couldn't find them. And then you find yourself in the business of having to manage the staff that are running your house, and you have to manage your business. So in effect, you have two businesses. And so he'd be trying to work from home, and he was saying how it looks so glamorous because he's got this gorgeous house and the pool and everything, and this beautiful home office, and the girlfriend on his arm, and the car and the kids and everything. And everyone was running in every 5 minutes, the yard, the person taking care of the yard, the person taking care of the pool, whatever. So what they ended up doing was they ended up downsizing from a 35,000 square foot house to about a 3,500 square foot house. And they said they are all so much happier. The kids are happier. The couple are happier. They simplified. And so I think that that's the other thing that you see really successful people do is they simplify their lives. And, I think that there's a reason Warren Buffett has stayed in the same house all these years, a small house that, he can manage quite nicely. So then, as you say, that he is in control and he owns the things, as opposed to all of this sort of overwhelming you. And it is just, it's like try to keep it simple as you build up. There are reasons for it.
Because you do have ups and downs. You can't bet on them. We certainly did after 20 years. And the things you own end up owning you. And I thought, part of my goal was the big lifestyle, which I did. And then you find, oh crap, man, I got all these payments, all these costs. I got to pay for my big house, the piano, needs service, the jacuzzi needs service.
Exactly.
Then, the maids have to come over. I'd have maids over to clean the house. I had this huge playroom in my basement. I had a pool table, foosball, air hockey, pinball. We had, the whole basement of my house, and then one of the rooms on the main level was just all video games. And I throw huge parties, and people come over and play all the games. Drum set was down there, ping pong, you name it, we had it. And people are just like, your whole house, Chris, is a play thing. And I'm like, yeah, I grew up poor, and this is how I'm coming to grips with it. And but then after a while, I realized, wow, I have to maintain all this stuff, and it's costly to maintain it. I had a place to live in not only Utah, but I had a place to live in Denver. I had a place to live in Vegas, and at one point, I was literally leaving on Thursday nights, flying to Vegas to spend the weekend at Vegas, and then flying back. And that was a weekend for Chris. Mm-hmm. And I had two BMWs, one at two different airports at any given time, a Jaguar in Denver. And sometimes I just sit it and go, I just want to sit home today and not care anymore and tune out about something. And then you realize, wow, I got to pay for all this stuff. And you're paying for your partners and your employees a lot of times too. That's another big giant bleed out. I remember when my partner quit our business to think he could go make a lot of money someplace else. And he quit our business, and we went down from paying him an extraordinary amount of money a month to where I replaced him with a $2,500 secretary to do his paperwork, and realized I was working my butt off to help keep him financed. And of course, a lot of the employees in the business as well. And by doing so, I was able to start working from home just by moving him off the payroll. And it was funny that I could replace him with a $2,500 employee. So that's how much work he wasn't doing.
So choose your partners carefully.
Choose your partners carefully. I'm not sure any partner is a good partner, but some people do seem to make it work. There's a lot more blowout partners when it comes down to it. Especially when the money gets on the table. Everyone's always friends and let's build something together. And then when the money gets on the table, that's when you kind of start finding out what partners you really have. And sometimes they don't see the forest for the trees, and they they want to take the initial money and spend it, and then they wreck the business because they want to cut off the nose to spite their face. So there's a lot that goes into being an entrepreneur, and it will come out at you in all the wrong moments, bring out probably the best in you if you can meet it in aptitude for your character.
Right. And I was about to say that because we've been talking so much about the reality of it, which is work, and more work and a lot of sacrifice, that perhaps we should also talk to people about why you do it and why you keep doing it, and what makes it fun. I mean, I love it. I wouldn't.
Wait, it's supposed to be fun? I'm waiting for that to kick in after 20 plus years.
I thrive on challenges, so I think it's fun in that sense.
If you do, you're thriving really well. Yeah, it's something that is going to soak up all your time. I mean, even if you go to the movies with your friends or family, even if you go at Disneyland or wherever, what you're still thinking about in the back of your head? Your freaking business. I mean, I remember going on vacations with my girlfriends, and they're like, "What are you thinking about?" I'm like, "I'm trying to figure out how to fix the bleed out of my telemarketing unit." And they're like, "You're at Disneyland. Have some fun." And you're like, I'm having fun if I can just figure out if.
Yeah, I remember a few months ago I was out with a guy for a weekend away, and it was one of those moments where I was like, do not discuss his brand with him. Do not discuss his brand with him. And next thing, I'm discussing his brand with him, and it was not at the most, it was a weekend away, let's put it that way. So it was probably not at a time when one should be discussing it. And so, but I had to laugh. I mean, because we had a really good discussion, but, so sometimes things happen, not over a business table and all that. But yeah, I mean, you find yourself pondering things at the strangest moments, or, watching, and I find myself, I'll be out in a public place and I'm watching how people respond to products, or they look at things. And you find what they find interesting, and how they're shopping, and how they're gathering the information, and what they're searching on, and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I mean, you are always sort of thinking, you're grocery shopping, trying to figure out a strategy for a client on their business, or, as you're buying the bread, I mean.
And nowadays clients can get to you 24/7. I've had them call me in the middle of the night. I've had them call me from international sites where, they're getting me late in the evening. I had a client the other day that's like, "Hey, Chris, I need to talk to you about what we're doing." I'm like, "Great. Let me call you here." And you're like, "It's 10 o'clock at night." So, yeah, I guess so, because I want some money. I want my clients to be happy. So that's what you do. And you gotta take that time aside. It's the hardest thing I think I've ever done in the world is start companies, but I can tell you that it's really changing me. It's made me a better person. I'm not sure if everyone would agree with that's worked with me, because I haven't always been the greatest boss, and it was a learning process. But I think it made me a better person in self-actualization. And you have to learn, or you better learn, because you're going to lose your business if you don't, that the buck stops with you. And you have to take responsibility and fix it. And if you don't, you'll take responsibility in bankruptcy court.
Yes. I mean, what I was going to say is that I think that one of the things that I've had to work with on clients, and I had to go through it myself, is not just giving up your snobbery, but understanding that your company is like a child, and it's allowed to have its own personality. And so the self-actualization is actually true, but it's because it is like it's an extension of you, but it's its own being. It's separate from you, because particularly in the branding and marketing aspects of it, you have to decide what look and feel you want, how you want people to feel about the company. And I don't think it has to be like some people, they just look and say, "No, I am the business." And it's like, but your business is its own separate, your being. And so it's a healthier way, because I think that then you have to separate out your sense of identity from the business and make it separate. And I think then it becomes easier to make the kinds of decisions you need to make to grow it and to have it be successful. kind of like a child in a way, where you have to then let them have their own identity and develop their own personality. And you look like you were going to say, you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, you're very right in that concept. There comes a point where you have to start, and if you're smart as an entrepreneur, you start thinking about the environment that you're going to build in your company, and you start laying the groundwork. A lot of it has to come from you, what they refer to as the man on the white horse. Everyone looks to the man on the white horse, the leader, the CEO. And you have to realize that you have to self-actualize and possibly grow in your business. There are some people that can be maniacal, narcissistic, just ugly, mean bosses. But if you're good at what you do, you have to realize that the environment, that you're going to be building an environment, a social sphere within your company. And that environment is what it means to your employees. I used to read a lot of books with Tom Peters back in the day, the Learning Core Organization, and how to create organizations and employees that learn, that develop, that can problem solve their own issues. And that's a really important thing. One of the sayings I used to have around my company is, no question is a bad question. No question is a dumb question. If you have, and I always have to encourage my employees, especially the new ones, please ask questions. Please ask questions. Don't be afraid. No one's going to call you dumb. And I had to create a safety area where it was okay for an employee to go, I don't fully understand this, even though I've been through training. Can you help me out? And sometimes it was frustrating, because sometimes you put an employee through 1 or 2 trainings and they still wouldn't be getting it. But you'd have to have this thing where, my biggest problem I found with the company was, if I had a new employee, or if I had an employee who didn't understand something, they would invariably be the one who broke something, and it cost 10 or 20 grand or 5 grand or whatever. So I learned very hard early on that I had to make sure everyone was really clear on what they were doing, because the person who wasn't would be the person who freaking screwed me hard, costing me money. And I'd have to clean up their mess and just go, okay, well, you didn't know any better. You're an employee.
And I think the other aspect to it is that you have to be prepared for feedback about yourself. And on the one hand, you have to be on a continuous process of self-improvement to be the best leader, or in my case, to serve my clients the best that I can. At the same time, you have to accept that we're all human and imperfect, and we're going to make mistakes. But you also have to be prepared to get the criticism and the upward reviews, and do something about it. Not just say, oh, well, I don't have to bother with that. No, you do. And it can be hard. Even the nicest constructive criticism, you have to, because not just you have to think about it, you have to actually actualize it and make sure that you're making those changes, because you want to build a company culture that has a good, you want your employees to be in not, I don't mean like a safe zone per se, but just you want them to feel that they're in an environment where they can speak up, they can ask questions, they can learn, they can take initiative and not be punished, because no one wants to work in a place where it's just completely top down and do this, do this, do this.
Or chaos, for that matter, drama.
Chaos, exactly.
I mean, I've seen people working at companies. I've seen friends that have companies where their personalities are very chaotic, and their Glassdoor reviews are horrible. And yeah, you've got to really set the tone for your corporation, because everything leads back to you. If things aren't working and everything's a mess and chaotic in your corporation, it's kind of like Donald Trump in the White House there. Things are chaotic because he is a chaotic mind that can't seem to focus on something for a very long time, or learn or be educated. So you run into this problem where you have chaos around you at all times. And so regardless of what whether you're on the left or the right now, you can look at that White House and go, there's a lot of chaos going on. Some people think it's intentional. Some people think it's accidental, but there is chaos. You can see that on the tweet storms coming out. And the person on the white horse sets the tone for everything. And, I don't want to make this political, but I just want to use it as an example. So I'm trying not to be political here, but let's use it as a thing. I've often said, from 20 years, 25, 30 years of doing business, that the man on the white horse sets the tone for the corporation. And if you're seeing problems in employees and you're having to react to those problems, then you have to realize it's coming from you and the message you're sending, whether you intend to send that message or not. And I've seen bad managers, even when I worked at corporations, and at one point with Cincinnati Bell, Fortune 500 company at the time, one of the baby bells. And you see bad managers, and usually what you see around them is they're constantly having to fire people around them. People are either quitting or firing around them. And it comes to a point where they fire so many people and turn the staff over so many times that you go, you know what? You're the problem as the leader. We've got to remove you. And then once we remove you, everything will normalize if we get a good leader back in there. And so if your company's having a lot of problems, a lot of chaos, you're laying off a lot of people, firing people all the time, it might not be those people. It's just you firing them because you think it's them. And really, they're just reflecting and behaving and acting in a way that's reflective of what you've set forth as an example or an environment or culture in your company. And that can backfire and cost you a lot of money and a lot of grief. I've seen friends that they can be a little toxic. They can react. I think I went through some of that in my early years of entrepreneurism where I was toxic. I wasn't dealing with the stress and anxiety well. That causes problems with employees suing you, causes problems with employees reporting, nasty reviews on Glassdoor. And sometimes in your local city, it can create a reputation that people don't like you or your company, and it loses you business.
And I'd like to talk a little about corporate culture, because I think that company culture and developing it can sometimes fall by the wayside in terms of the importance, because you're working on your services or you're working on your products. And one of the stories I would like to share about how something so small that seems not important unless you have been in the trenches literally, and that I'm going to tell a story about that an Air Force colonel told me a few years ago. And it was during his experiences when he was stationed in Germany. He's retired. He was retired when I talked to him. He had been a second lieutenant stationed in Germany in the early 1960s, like just fresh out, with his newly minted, officer and all that. And at that time in the early 1960s, there were still a lot of German officers who had served as young men, during World War II. And so, of course, they would get into conversations about, why the Allies won and et cetera, et cetera. One of the issues that came up that I have found absolutely fascinating, and I should note that I am a military brat with a lot of men in my family who have served for generations.
Thank you.
So one of the issues that the Germans brought up is they said that one of the reasons why the Americans did so well is that the Germans could not cut off their head. The German military could not cut off the head of the American military. And what they meant by that is that if you look at the stories in World War II, whenever the Germans went into an area, whether it was France or Poland or Czechoslovakia, they would line up the officers and they would shoot them. Because with a lot of the cultures of those militaries and in those countries, if you didn't have the officers and certainly you didn't have your sergeants, the military didn't know where to go. So it would be the first thing they would do. So instead of fighting hand-to-hand combat and fighting a whole army, they would literally just basically find the officers. Now, I'm highly simplifying, and perhaps some history professors might take disagree with me, but I'm retelling a story that I was told. So what the German officers said was that basically we couldn't cut off your head because we could go over, we could knock out every person in the division, from the major to the captain to the lieutenants, and knock out the sergeants. And you could get down to the lance corporals 2 weeks out of boot camp. Everyone understood the mission. Everyone understood what their job was. They understood how to execute it. And they kept pushing forward and pushing forward and pushing forward, no matter how far down the chain you knocked them out. So they said that what it came down to is that they had to fight the entire U.S. military for every foot of land. And so that has always fascinated me as an example of how, something that people don't think of as being a culture. The American culture is that every person has a voice all the way down. They understood the mission, pushed forward, and that helped, the U.S. military do better. And so you might be surprised at how far you can go with your business if every person down the chain has a voice and they are vested and they understand the mission and they're willing to push forward.
And you've got to listen. You've got to listen to your business. You got to be like a safe cracker with your business, where you're constantly listening to how to turn that dial just right to dial in the profits and the revenue. Sometimes you got to listen to your employees. Your employees have a lot of good ideas. I remember years ago when the mortgage business changed quite dramatically, where it wasn't bringing people into offices, it was going to people's homes. The salespeople had to do. And I was having a real tough time because I was holding us to the model, and my employees were yelling and screaming, we can't get our sales unless we change with the way the public has changed in wanting to get their deliveries. And so we had to finally embrace that. But yeah, you have to listen to your employees, especially the ones in the front lines, because they're usually the ones that know what's going on. But yeah, you're like a war general. You're constantly moving around, making sure that supply and food lines are working, making sure that the Army's going the direction it needs to do, strategy for battles. It's never ending. It's one of the hardest things you will do in your life, probably next to childbirth or raising kids. Raising kids might be harder. I don't know if you're forced to be self-actualized when you raise kids, but your business, you have to self-actualize if you want to make a buck. I mean, it just beat you senseless as a character. Imagine raising kids does some of that, but I see some people don't change much. But owning your own company will definitely kick your butt and make you work harder than you ever worked in your life. You lose a lot over it.
And when you're still at that one, when you're still at the one person stage like I am, where I'm just going to probably start next year bringing in other people to do the accounting and some of the branding work and things like that, the copywriting. What I would say is that you really have to listen to feedback from your clients, and you have to ask. And it's harder in that sense because this isn't even like annual reviews. You're having to send those follow-ups to say, how am I doing? How can I improve? And I've gotten some very good reviews, but I've gotten, some private comments about needing to be, because of the chaos of starting early on and realizing I'm a very organized person, but I have to really tighten up the processes and my operations and figure out how to schedule things and how to manage the projects to deliver on time. And that's very hard to do in technology because you're not just, it's not a factory line. So you have to be prepared to take the feedback but ask. You have to not be afraid to ask. And so it's part of building a company and making sure that you get a good reputation.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. Well, Jewel, I appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. We'll have to have you back in the show and talk some more about entrepreneurism and some of the other. I know you had a lot of topics we had options to discuss, so we'll have to follow up with those as we go.
Yeah, I thank you for inviting me, and I think I still want to have a fun one where we discuss how my standard poodle is awesomer than your husky.
I didn't read that when you first said that to me. I went, okay, she's got a bunch of topics, and then I read it I think yesterday, and I was like, okay, what are topics? And then the fourth one was how my standard poodle is better than Siberian Huskies. I think I have some really good friends that have standard poodles, and they're beautiful dogs. Are standard poodles the big poodles?
They're the big poodles.
They're
poodles. About, the males tend to be about 55 to 65 pounds and the females are 45 to 55. And keep in mind that they were duck dogs in the Middle Ages. So they're actually hunting dogs. They're considered non-sporting now, but there's been actually a renaissance where some hunters are actually starting to use them as duck dogs again, and they're beating out the Labrador retrievers.
They're big dogs. They're like small horses.
They are, and they're super smart. And I think they're a lot like Huskies, just vocalize. You have entire conversations with Huskies. But my dog, my poodle, I'll send you a couple of videos, but he will just, I've been told off more than a few times, I have to say.
Yeah. I get told off every morning. Go to bed, Daddy, give me a treat. Quit laying in bed.
I get told to go to bed. I'm working too much. Scratch my mind. Go to bed.
She wants to get me out of bed, so I'll give him treats in the morning when I go down to make the coffee. And so she's usually hussing that. And then for about the first 5 minutes, I get cussed out. Both my Huskies would cuss me out in the morning. I don't know if they were ornery or if they were just trying to wake me up, but they would always cuss me out. And then you give them something, and then they're kind of happy. I need to do a compilation film one of these days of all the recordings of Freya cussing me out and just do like a big long video of Freya cuss outs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the standard poodles are beautiful dogs. I have some very good friends that own them. I play with them at the dog parks. You know, to me, any dog is a good dog.
Yeah, I love dogs. I love pets too.
But I understand how people love their pets, and I'm a big pet proponent, I guess. So whether you have a husband or whether you have a dog or a cat as your pet,
we'll save that for someday when we're both completely brain dead and we just want to have a silly, you know, make entrepreneurship fun. We can.
I think I'm already brain dead, so I may be there. I'm still waiting on a lobotomy appointment. I'm thinking that's going to improve my outlook on life at this point, the way it's going. So thanks for joining us, Jewel. Give us your plugs again, where people can find you on the interwebs.
Sure. On the interwebs, you can find me at www. I feel like I still have to say that .impactzone.co. I know www.
I'm the same one.
Be over that by now. At impactzone.co, and that's my web address. And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and at Impact Zone Co. And then on Facebook, it's just Impact Zone Consultancy. And if you search on just Impact Zone, you will actually find Universal Studios and the guy who does golf. But so you'll be sure to add the consultancy part.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, Jewel Ward. Everybody, check out our stuff online, and be sure to give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, hit that bell notification button, hit the bell notification button. It won't hurt. It's free. Won't cost you a dime. Go to patreon.com. You can enter in some of the giveaways. We're going to be giving away a JBL speaker here soon, and a few other, I think, really cool backpacks and some other gear. So be sure to subscribe to that. Patreon.com/Chris Voss. You can see us now on TuneIn with the podcast, and also iTunes and Google Play, and also take and subscribe on YouTube as well. I think that covered all of them. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We certainly appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Jewel, for coming by.
All right. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. We'll do this again. Thank you, Chris.